Hello, and thanks for tuning in. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. You're on.
This is a 102.7 FM Toowoomba original
Dave
podcast.
Wallis, who is a consultant and business coach. Welcome, Dave. Welcome, everybody, to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. How do you be a sounding board? What sort of industry for a start?
Well, my background's probably for the last 25 plus years has been in the disability sector, the community sector, so I suppose that's where my passion is. And I know at the moment that's a changing world, the disability sector, and rightly so, but so that's probably where my expertise are, but also around the compliance, auditing, how to be a compliant business, because I've worked under that sort of scheme for all those years, 25 years, we were always audited.
So you had this quite successful business, wasn't it? And which you started in 2015, am I right?
Yep.
Yeah, and it was working within the NDIS, and then it became this huge sort of multi-location thing, over 100 staff.
Yeah.
Did that happen by accident or by purpose, or?
Well, I started off as a sole trader, and I think at the time I was well known in the community at the time, so it grew sort of automatically really and quite fast. And then we got too big for a sole trader, and then I had to set up the company, which is the Raw Sports Services, and it just kept growing from there. And that's, I suppose, where I come back to the sounding board, because sometimes if you just had someone to say, if you're going to do this, how about you do that? But so I did. It was a fantastic time, and I think I learnt more about business when I actually sold it. There's a lot of moving parts to the business.
Like what? Explain that to me a little bit more.
Just sometimes as you run and you get things like fleet cars, and you do whatever you do to get them, like personal guarantees, things like that, which tend to get a bit complicated when you go to sell a business.
Right,
Because you're no longer.
Yeah,
part of it.
And was part of that success, Dave, the fact that the NDIS was brought in that time, or had it already been operating before that?
I was in the disability sector before the NDIS. I actually did 10 years managing a disability employment service, which was federally funded. And I suppose that's probably where my passion is, around employment. When the NDIS was introduced, I got on there straight away, because obviously that's where it was heading, and I got registered as a registered provider, and that's where it went from there. Yeah.
Can you tell me this, because there's so much discussion at the moment about the restructure or the sustainability of the NDIS with the funding, and you hear all these reports about the number of people that aren't accredited or aren't registered. Is that the right terminology? How did that possibly happen?
To be honest with you, it was very sloppy, I think, the way they set it up initially, and now they're obviously finding it hard. So I think the stats that I got, there's around about 20,000 nationally registered providers. They obviously got to get audited and are compliant, and there's something like over 100,000 that aren't. And I think there was a bit of I wouldn't call it a loophole, but there was a part of the scheme you could actually operate without being registered. So there's no big commission, they can't touch them because they don't have a registration. So unless they do something legally wrong.
And in your opinion, was that really dangerous for the clients?
They can got an ABN and who's to check even if they've been screened. It's scary, and in an industry where you're working with vulnerable people, you can't be a doctor unless you're accredited and registered. So
or you can't work with children.
No,
And so would these people? Do they even have to have a blue card or anything like that?
They're supposed to. But see, there's no unless. And the thing is, if you're working with vulnerable people, they're obviously. And sometimes, and I'm generalising, but not proactive to say show us your blue card or it's more on personality and connecting with that person. So it is. I think the changes are definitely well overdue and needed, in my opinion.
Can you give me, this is from someone outside the sector, can you give me an idea or a brief summary of what sort of changes are going to happen besides, because, you hear, and perhaps you could explain to me too, about where does autism sit in all of the NDIS, and is that being cut out, or is that being recognised, or how does that all work?
From my understanding, I think they've set up Thriving Kids, and the interesting thing, presently there's I think over 700,000 on the scheme, and nearly half of those are under 18. And I think that they didn't prepare for that. And so yes, autism's a big key factor in some of that and behavioural stuff, and it's a tough one because often kids under 18 don't have a big package in comparison to support, and as we've all been parents, if you've got other children, you've got one with a disability, you're way down, and you probably actually need those supports, just to function.
Yeah. So Dave, you mentioned having your kids. So you didn't start off in the disability sector. You started out as a tradesman, is that right? What sort of tradie were you?
A carpenter, John. I left school at grade, got my trade eventually, and then this is back in the 80s, so it was pretty tight. This was when interest rates were 16%, I think, by memory. And my father at that time was concreting as well, so I learnt 2 trades, and I started working for myself around 22. So the disability sector was far from my mind. Having said that, I have an older brother. He's 8 years older than me, has a severe intellectual disability. When he was born, the cord was tied around his neck. So we're talking back in the 50s. So I suppose I had the awareness, but not to the extent now.
Tell me a little bit more about your childhood. Like, were you Toowoomba born and bred? Or?
No, I wasn't actually. I was born in Perth, in the suburbs. I was growing up there. It was probably one of the roughest suburbs around. The last of 5 kids, and I grew up in a great time. So then I went to school, high school, did my trade there, and then eventually moved to Queensland in 1989.
What brought you over here?
Yeah, just wanted to change and
go to the East Coast.
Yeah. And Perth is very isolated. Yeah. And no, it's great. I come over here, and I was still in the building industry. I actually moved from the suburbs to Warwick, which was a bit of a culture shock, but it was great. I learnt about the country, and then was still on the tools. And
Can we just talk about your older brother for a bit? Like, was he the eldest? And then
no, I've got a half brother, a brother, sister, and then there's Andrew, who's severely... So mum was in labour for a long time and probably should have had a caesarean, but we're talking back in the 50s, and he obviously got starved of oxygen, so he can't talk. He can swear pretty well. I was over in Perth last month, and I went and visited him, so we had a good old chat. Yeah. Well,
where did he live with your family all the
No,
time?
he did up until 13, and there was not a lot of services around at the time, and mum had us kids. So they put him into, and pretty much an institution really, a bit like Bailey here, but it was in Perth. And I remember visiting as a kid, and it was very similar to the movies. They come out in a white suit and keys, and you get him unlocking the doors and how'd he come, and sometimes he'd have a black eye or tooth missing, but he never lost his sense of humour, I can tell you that.
Right. And was that sort of a bit terrifying for you as a kid? A bit overwhelming?
Yeah, it was, and I still can smell the disinfectant smell, where they're clean. But I think my older sister and brother were more involved with him because I'd come along a bit later. There's an 8-year gap between my sister and Andrew. So that time at school, I never mentioned it because you would have got teased. So I kept it pretty quiet, even though in our local where we lived, if you come home over the weekend, he obviously was playing with me and mates on the street.
So he used to come home on the weekends, did he? Yeah. Do you ever talk to your mother about how and your father about how they coped with that, or was it just kind of just what you did?
Yeah, it's just there wasn't many options though, and I mean, they brought him home a lot and did a lot for him. My sister actually, because he's non-verbal, she actually became a sign language interpreter to thinking or learn sign language to thinking that might help communicate with him, but I don't think he has the capacity, although he lets you know if he doesn't like something.
Right. So then you were working over here, you moved to Warwick. Had you had your own family by then?
Yes, I had 2 children, and that's how I got out of moved away from the industry, because my son was born, and it was the time, 1990, so it was a time when they didn't have the mandatory hearing tests for babies. So unbeknownst to us, he was profoundly deaf and weird. I just thought, I've got a little naughty boy, maybe my karmas are coming back on me.
Yeah.
So, and his sister was 5 years older than him, so we lived sort of on 10 acres, and if I was yelling out for him, my daughter would turn around to see what I'm looking at or yelling for, and then he'd turn around to see what she's looking at. So from my perspective, it looked like he could hear, but there was it wasn't until just a few things happened. I thought, that's weird, his speech wasn't progressing, and took a while, took probably 7 different referrals to an old GP, did the old saucepan behind the head trick.
God.
And
really?
then we got referred down to the Mater,
So what sort of age was he then?
I was nearly 3.
Wow.
So a lot of that formative years, so there's a lot of catching up. So I rang my sister, who was an interpreter. So I said, Sis, what do I do? And she said, look, learn sign language, Auslan. And so then I got immersed into the learning that, got into the deaf community, because you sort of got accepted in the deaf community because you had a deaf son, and it's 1% of parents learn to sign for their deaf kids. And it was a lot of catching up with language and concepts, and I used to sign stories to him that had concepts of tomorrow or wait, or just stuff that we take for granted because he wasn't hearing the chitty chat. The informal talk is where they learn a lot. So, but I mean, now he's got more friends and poke a stick out.
Wow, Dave, that's quite a lot to process there. You say that 1% of parents learn to sign. Really, what's the barrier there for parents? Do you think
it's quite a can of worms, but I think so. Signing's obviously a very visual language, so a lot of parents don't want to stand out. So, and then you got the technology sort of debate, cochlear implants, hearing aids. And they did say that to me. They said, he's eligible for a cochlear implant. I basically said, look, I just want him to grow up as a normal boy. I don't want him with stuff other people might have a different view from it. And because he was a boy and he rough and tumbled, and so, and the research I did with signing, or Auslan, its own language. So he was learning his natural language, basically. So, I mean, there's obviously challenges when we went to school, but
something really interesting that I read, and you could perhaps explain it better to me. The 90% rule, that 90% of deaf children have hearing parents.
Yes.
Which I just found incredible.
Yes, and it's funny, in the deaf community, if you're a deaf child and have got deaf parents and deaf relatives, it's like royalty. Because there's no communication problems.
Yes,
so if you look at the 1% that do sign, there's a lot that don't. So, they think they're understanding lip reading and all the rest of it. And a lot of the issues, that come from the deaf child, they think I was being naughty. It's really around communication. So. And when Levi was growing up, I mean, he was a typical boy. He'd tease his sister and, he did everything like a boy would, but he signed in a different way. Or spoke in a different way.
There's so much of the Auslan that I'm so fascinated by, and I really want to get into that. But do you know why he was born profoundly? Do you say profoundly deaf?
Yeah. No, deaf is the hearing impaired's going out.
Right, you don't say hearing impaired yet.
denotes as an impairment.
The language is
so
impairment.
So the language around, and there's a whole research around that as well, because they hear the negative side a whole lot. No, he don't. He was prem, and he was put in a humic crib. Don't know, but I did research our family tree, and there was 4 Wallaces that come out to Australia, 2 stayed in Melbourne and 2 went to Perth, which I think is our lineage. But the Wallaces in Melbourne, there's actually quite a deaf strand.
Interesting.
And I actually met, we're not sure if she's a relative, but her parents were deaf, and she wrote a book and all that sort of stuff about it.
Yeah. So do you think, I mean, you sort of alluded to it, but do you think the fact that you had some type of contact with the disability community, or is that just your personality? You just went, we've got to get on with it?
Yeah, solution focused I am. It's one of those questions.
That's right.
And I just, what now, really? And I think, okay, what do I do? And it was interesting, once I started learning signing for him, to change the anger just went down from like being a 10 down to 2, compared to when we didn't know. So I could see the benefit of it. Yeah. Schooling was different. A bit of history, he was the first child in Queensland to have an Auslan interpreter. Yeah. And that took a lot of a lot of meetings with the education system. Anyway, that's another story.
Bucked and balked. I'll just remind the listeners that you're tuned into Big Little Small Talk. My name's Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Dave Wallis, who, amongst other things, is telling us about how he learnt to sign Auslan. Now, Dave, you learnt. Did your wife and the rest of the family learn?
At that time, my wife did learn, yeah, but I took it further. I started working for, it was then called the Queensland Deaf Society. Now it's called Deaf Connect, I think. But prior to that, I was in the community a fair bit, and then I worked towards getting my accreditation, become a paraprofessional interpreter, yeah, so...
Was there a period of transition where you're still working as a chippy and you're doing some, and were you still living in Warwick? Like, where were you? How were you learning to sign in Warwick?
Oh, it was a lot of trips. There was quite a big deaf community in Toowoomba and Brisbane, yeah. And so I was, for a while there, I was a couple of days chipping in Warwick, then driving to Toowoomba, and where I cut my teeth, I worked with deaf, placing them in employment, finding jobs for them, supporting them in employment, and then the manager of that particular branch left, and I took over, and I managed that for 6 years, I think. Yeah. So
And just tell me a tiny bit more about how your son's anger sort of just de-escalated once he could communicate.
He could get his point across, and I'll never forget. You know, when kids lose something and they want it, you know, and he was trying to let us know before we knew he was deaf, and I thought you want toast, you want, you know, open the fridge, what do you want? No, and he's, yeah, and we go to the room, get his toys out, which one? No, and he got to the end where he was getting angry, but he sat on my lap and just sobbed, and I thought, I'll get a bit emotional. Yeah. What he was looking for was his cardboard box that he played in, which we'd thrown out, and he just wanted to sit in there and have his cards, and you know, it's something so simple. Yeah. So once he started learning signing, and it's interesting how their mind works. You know, kids, you say there's a sign for dog, you know, that's okay, we've got a dog, we got 2 dogs, and after a while he looks, it says, okay, they're 2 different breeds. So he says, what's the name of that one and what's the name of that? Not the name of the dog, but the name of the breed. Yeah. It's very interesting how then you can see the language starting to develop and blossom.
Yeah. So when I want to know, you know, a lot of the protocols around the deaf community. So
very political.
Beg your pardon?
Very political.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. So, you know, is the best way, say, for someone when you meet a deaf person, do you say, do you want to sign? How do you want to communicate?
Probably more proactive now. So often they'll arrive with the interpreter. And rule number 1, you still talk to the deaf person, and the interpreter sits next to you, the speaker, or the doctor, or whoever it is, so they can see both, they can see the body language. And so that's become a lot more proactive. In the past, I remember I've been interpreting for a deaf person at the doctors, and they hand me the prescription. Yes. And I say, it's not for me. Yeah. So I think it's just acknowledging, if there's no interpreter around, basically, you know, write it down, point. My biggest experience with deaf people when they communicate with non-signers is that they're actually the experts of communicating with people who don't sign, because they have to do it for the whole life. All the time. Yeah. So they'll eventually tell you, and either if you've got a piece of paper, instead a lot of people keep trying to rely on lips. Yeah. It's the point. Yeah.
Do most deaf people know how to lip read as well, or just depends?
Depends. So I used to teach sign language, and that was one of my favourite little subjects, because the best lip reader, and that's one-on-one, can get 25% of the conversation. Wow. Now, it all depends on the hearing loss, because sometimes if they're losing the high pitch, you lose the SH, the sh off the word, and if they don't hear low pitch, you might hear room, you only hear the M, but you know, there's... So 25, 2.5 words in 10. Now, that gets worse if there's 3 people in the room.
You talked about your daughter, and she's older. Do you feel like you parented her the same way you parented your son? Are there different rules for different people?
That's a good question. I've had many discussions with her, and as much as he tried to keep it even, obviously there was a lot more focused on him, and so I think she got a little bit jaded with that, although she still sang, but I think it was just times, a lot of the times when I was where she'd come to me with work, or, you know, to say she had a bit of dad time, because there was a lot of emphasis on him. You know, we're going to deaf events, and, you know, I'd she probably didn't really want to go. So yeah, it is hard. And I think any family, doesn't matter if it's deaf or any sort of disability, there's always that.
Do you ever see them, if you're out as a family somewhere and you see them kind of not making fun of, but, you know, making fun of speaking in sign language about other people there?
Yeah, I've had that happen a couple of times.
And you have to say, kids.
And then someone, then they think you're deaf, and then you turn around and say, what's wrong? And, well,
yes, right, got it. Because my kids, when they first started school, they went to Toowong State School, which is a deaf immersion program. So the whole school went to, it was really interesting. I mean, one of my kids really struggled to learn to read and write anyway, let alone, you know, doing Auslan as well. So,
one thing I didn't know is when he was going to school, generally the class, their spelling, the hearing kids, their spelling improved because there was a visual aid. A lot of times the interpreter was a finger spell out. Yeah. So often the teacher said they'll sign for cat and they'd be underneath the desk, C-A-T, spell it out.
So you said that he was the first person to have a signing interpreter in class. So he went to mainstream school, did he?
Yeah, he went to mainstream, went to Warwick East School. So he was the first one to have an Auslan interpreter. Often what they provided, and this is another big can of worms, is sign English, which is a visual representation of English language. So the thought behind that is that if it was signed in English structure, then they'd learn English. So that came in the late 70s, I think. And the research is that when deaf kids left school, year 12, their literacy levels are around grade 4 and 5. So it didn't really work. So Auslan is a language, so what you're doing is translating from English into Auslan. It makes sense. Teaching English, you have to teach English as a second language. There's a lot in it, and that's why you have deaf schools that just have deaf teachers.
And what are your thoughts on, do you think they are better going to a segregated school? I suppose, you know, it's just not possible if you want to live in Warwick.
Yeah, and years ago there was a Dutton Park Deaf School, so there was boarders. You know, it was a bit like private schools here. Kids would go there and board, or they were day students. Yeah, so I think that was, and a lot of the older deaf say that was a great time because a lot of their friends they had there have been for life and experiences, and that's where a lot of their culture was formed. But now the trouble is you've got a deaf kid in this school, one, you got another deaf in another school, one is by himself, he's isolated. They've got programs now where they bring in deaf adults, but it's still not, you know, they don't. Yeah. It's like us going to an Italian school and being the only... Australian.
So nobody's kind of talking to them and they're not talking to anyone else. Yeah.
So that was one of the biggest things when he went to school. We had a couple of kids that learnt sign, which is good. But, you know, sometimes they can't come over and play. You know what I mean? It's hard.
So you said, Dave, before, you said, he's got more friends than I have, or poke a stick out or whatever. Not maybe more than you had.
No, I reckon he has. He lives in Melbourne.
Are most of his friends deaf?
Yeah, most. What's he now, 35, I think. He lives in Melbourne, he's married, he works at TAFE, I think, because, you know, he doesn't need to talk to the old man anymore.
No. So say just on that, how would you speak to each other?
Nah, FaceTime.
Right.
And technology's great now.
Yes.
There used to be, look, you can send a video if they don't need to answer straight away. Yeah. You know, WhatsApp. Yeah. So the technology's helped great in that concern. Yeah. I've interpreted for deaf where they've been at a shop buying a computer and they'll put me on FaceTime. I can sign what the salesman's saying, and I haven't left home. All of that. And they get all the facts.
So much different. That was one of my questions I wanted to ask you. How does the deaf community look out for each other?
It's a very closed community. Probably not so much now with Facebook. Prior to Facebook, they had deaf clubs. There was deaf clubs everywhere, and that was the meet and greet. And so it's obviously they've got their own language, their own community, their own culture. So it's very tight knit. It's a bit like now in English where there's a lot of American sayings that kids are getting, and it's similar with Auslan. There's a lot of American signs come in because it's quite interesting.
So tell me, that's another question. Is Auslan a universal language?
No.
So tell me about the differences.
Okay, so it's Australian Sign Language, but it's...
yes.
And a bit like I come from Perth in Queensland, there's different dialects. So you can almost tell from a sign of where they're from, Melbourne or Perth. Or,
Is that right?
yeah.
Wow.
So New Zealand, any country with it, it's funny, English-spoken countries have all got their own sign language. New Zealand's got theirs. Americans, completely different. It's a one-handed spelling, and French, you know. So when
Could you get by though?
Yeah, it's very. Deaf people are great at it. I went to a World Federation conference where there was all different sign languages, and it's quite interesting. Yeah. But it's funny when Australia first colonised. So you had Britain come out. So British deaf people, we had their British Sign Language, and then Irish come out, and there was Irish Sign Language. So Melbourne's very strong Irish influence, and then that they melded together and created Auslan.
Right, that is unbelievable.
Yeah.
What about things like humour?
Yeah, different type of humour.
What is the humour?
It's more
is it
visual.
more visual? Yeah.
I don't know how you explain it. See, a lot of our hearing humours are play on words. So, you know, and tone of voice. So it is completely different, but yeah.
And do you find all the interpreting that you do, are you sort of using a lot of your body to act out things? And
yeah, you do. And I remember once I was interpreting this trade show, and I think I had to do 4 hours, and you get sore between the shoulders, and you get brain drain because you're constantly English in, Auslan out, or back the other way, you know. So now they say 2 hours or an hour and a half, and you need another interpreter to swap over. So yeah, you do. There's interesting. I did a lot of interpreting in the prisons, and that's where I found out later about vicarious trauma. So every 6 months, they go through their psych, and they go review the crime, and to see if they've rehabilitated, or so they actually go through the crime. So this particular person I was interpreting for, it was rape and murder. So he's signing the stuff, and you're verbally saying it, and it's like you get home, you think, So you got to be very careful that you look after yourself professionally.
Yeah.
And not only the signing, well, interpreters, but spoken languages too. So they're listening to, say, Middle East, what's happened over there, and then they're interpreting in English. So it's coming out of their mouth, it wasn't them. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. Thanks for tuning in today. You're on Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan, and we're talking to Dave Wallis, mostly about Auslan and all its intricacies. You were talking about going into the prisons and interpreting for those guys. So many questions about that, but one thing I was reading about is things where there isn't a sign for murder, and that the only sign for murder is the choking sign. Is that, can you tell me about that?
Yeah, you got to be very careful. It's a bit like the sign for suicide was signed, but it could be...
Was cutting the wrist.
Yeah, cutting the wrist, but it might be gas. So yeah, there is different. So you, as an interpreter, you got to be very in tune with what you need, a bit of background information, because you could sign a sign for murder, and they say, and in their head they're saying, I didn't kill him like that. No, they're wrong. Right. So it sounds like they're changing the story, but it's not, because the sign's not quite. It's actually quite. You'll be very careful.
Yeah. And I was talking to my nephew who does some signing as well, and he was talking about the sort of the code of ethics, and he was saying that is it the demand control schema? Does that sound? No, that might be a bit something. They might have been off on a tangent. But what I interpreted was that, say if you're doing 2 sessions, a workplace health and safety session, you're signing for one person who's instructing this group of people, and then the second person is you're giving the same lesson, but it's a different person who's giving the instructions, and they might say something or give the wrong information. Like, ethically, what do you do as the interpreter?
No, you got to be true to if they're saying this, they're saying it. It's like, so you're interpreting whatever you're saying, I interpret it. It could be a pack of lies, but you just have to do it. Right. And they've got to be attuned to. It's like, how can I can't give an example, but there is a code of ethics, and the interpreter has to be very careful. So you go to an interpreting job, and you're interpreting for an 18-year-old, and the mum's sitting in the waiting room. Then you go in there and interpret, and they come out, and the mother says, "So what happened?" So you need to ask your daughter or son, "I'll interpret for you."
Right. Yeah.
It's huge.
Do you select the jobs that you're going to do, or is it? I mean, I know that you're probably not doing so much of that anymore.
No.
But you know, like, was that a choice to go into the prisons and do that work?
At that time, because I was running the service here in Toowoomba, and I was a male, because it's very female dominated, which is fair enough.
Most interpreters are female, aren't
Yeah,
they?
it's coming better now.
Right.
I mean, not saying it's wrong, but
Yeah.
and probably, you know, I had to do it. Now, you can choose the jobs, you know, because I've interpreted one for a young kid that was sexually abused. Probably now I wouldn't do it. It's just too much.
Yeah.
So you got to look after your own health, mental
That's
health.
right.
So.
And I interrupted you before when you said about your son. You said he's married.
Yeah.
Is he married to a deaf person as well?
No, he's married to a hearing person, but she can sign. And
What's her background? Is that
she's
because
actually Japanese, I think.
right?
Yeah.
Did she grow up in a signing world?
Yeah, no, but she got involved with it, and they knew each other, and that's how they. Yeah.
Right.
And
what about, have they got children?
No, they haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know what their reason is.
Yeah, and it's probably best not to ask. I think as a father, it's not really.
Yeah, it's not my place.
My last question about this is about comedic timing. How do you do that?
What's that?
Well, you know, like with humour and the jokes. You said before, how do you do humour?
It's interesting. I can't really explain it because it's a different language. You know, it's a bit like Italians. You know, their humour's different to ours, and
yeah.
you know, there's deaf jokes. There's
What's a deaf joke?
Oh, can't do it on radio.
No. That is one thing you can't do on the radio.
But yeah, there's deaf theatre. There's deaf art.
Deaf art.
Yeah, because there's research has shown like visually they're more obviously visually in tone, and that you can put a hearing person into a room and say, and come out and say, explain everything in that room. Put a deaf person in, same time, come out and the deaf person say, you know, there's that a lot more because their peripheral vision's wider. Yeah.
Well, is that true though? Yeah. That was another question, or is that just a myth? You know, you've lost one sense, so your other senses are more attuned. Is that true?
They're very in tune to body language. You know, I support a lot of deaf in work, and they can tell if somebody's not happy with somebody else. And you might, go straight over your head. But
yeah, how interesting. Just before we leave that topic about music, what's the deaf world's relation to music?
Because I hear it sometimes very differently. And I remember I was having a chat to a couple of blokes, and he said he's got a new car, and he said, "Oh, that sound system great, yeah." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I can feel it." Boom,
right,
boom.
Yeah, the vibration.
I remember going to a wedding with my son, and he likes to get up on the dance floor too, but he'd feel the speaker. He takes his shoes off so he could feel it. Yeah, so very completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting.
It is.
Tell me about the intuition and the being able to pick up on what's going on in the office and all of that.
Yeah, they can tell body language, facial expressions. Biggest thing that they used to get annoyed at when I was supporting for work, those two are chatting over there all the time, and see they can't chitty chat, so they get on to work.
Yes, okay.
Unless they're not a deaf person there. But.
Yes.
Or they'll look at them two talking. You know, sometimes if we're talking to somebody, we might look the other way and laugh, and they happen to be looking at them, and they're talking about me.
Right.
But they weren't. Yeah. But it's in tune with body language.
I'm trying to get this idea going for a Churchill Fellowship about small talk, and part of it was, if you don't know what the small talk in the office is, how do you know what the culture
Absolutely,
is? And
right.
I couldn't work up enough to get that to a Churchill Fellowship, but maybe I might go back there now, yeah.
But there is a lot around incidental talk, and that's especially when kids are growing up, because they learn a lot about, so mum and dad's had an argument, and that they actually hear sometimes how they've resolved it, whereas deaf, they don't get that. So often there's how they handle that sort of thing. Conflict is different.
Conflict resolution, It's all modelling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And that's just...
For deaf parents are better for the deaf child. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see, yeah.
Because everything's visual. There's no language barrier.
Yeah, okay. So you said that you actually like compliance, audits, HR realities. Is that true?
No,
Does
I don't
anyone
like it.
really like that sort of stuff?
I don't like it. I've just had experience. Yeah. There's certain things that sometimes it's just probably again explaining a little bit different to what is compliance, what's it for. So, I hate all the... When I first started moving into the white collar, I'd never use a computer. So it's just learning. A lot of times is why we're doing it. It's not just compliance. It's because,
Safety,
protecting this person's rights. So I suppose I've just been audited all the time. So,
but see, that's the weird thing. Like you said, that all these people are operating out there without checks and balances, and then you've been audited all the time. How does that happen? Is it more about the paperwork than about the client?
Well, they can. I think it's monitorised. They see the dollar value and okay, I don't need to pay $3,000-4,000 for an audit.
Oh, I see.
And it's all that compliance stuff.
Yeah. So this is the small business, you mean?
Yeah. And now they're bringing in mandatory registration, I think.
Yeah, and reporting, I suppose. Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier about your emphasis on getting people with disability into employment. Yeah.
That is my passion, I must admit. Just purely, and I'm run workshops and talk to businesses about, because it doesn't matter what funding cycle you've got, the strategies are usually the same about how to employ someone with a disability. So that is my passion, because I've seen the difference between not working and just getting, say, 1 or 2 shifts, and you ask them, what are you doing? I'm working. I've got, changes their focus. It's just...
the dignity of work, it's
dignity
called.
Work. And, we all don't like to hear the alarm clock go off, but... it only takes 6 months if you're not working that you start to go down, your confidence. But if you add disability on top of that, but I must admit, people with disabilities are the most resilient people. They'll spend years looking for a job and they'll eventually get one. And but the other side, the flip side of that is the business. Actually, it's benefiting them, not but from a community perspective, because I know a lot of people will go and buy off a certain business if they're giving somebody a crack, and I've seen
so
a lot.
The workshops that you run them for businesses on how to employ someone with a disability.
Yep.
And what sort of things do you cover?
I cover about the processes and what does support, what does it look like, what does good support look like, what does bad support look like. Because a lot of the employers are probably worried, if it doesn't work out, I'm going to get taken to the discrimination board or whatever it is. So it's very similar to employing someone, mainstream person, but it's just a few little checks and balances where, and a lot of businesses think, it's got to be a full-time job. Well, no, it doesn't. A lot of times it's part-time, 1 or 2 shifts. And I talk about job carving, in the way position. I've done it with a few businesses in the past where there's a full-time position. We've actually made 2 part-time or 3 out of 1 position, still the same hours but just broken up.
What do you think most businesses' barriers or reluctance? Are they kind of embarrassed to ask, what can I ask this person to do, or what's their capability?
Part of the workshops I talk about questions that no one wants to ask.
You can't ask that.
So and often everybody's got a perception of what disability looks like, and generally it's when the building has got steps or I haven't got a lift. In my 25 plus years, I've probably placed 2 people in a wheelchair. The rest is of what I call the hidden disability, deaf, intellectual, autism on the spectrum. So I think that its perception is probably a big thing. And then there's certain things, that can happen. Someone's got an intellectual disability, they're not aware of the workplace, do's and don'ts, and that's where part of the support comes in, and when you pick it up, and how do we manage that?
There is support, is that, who's providing that?
There's funded services that do disability employment, but I suppose I'm independent, I'm not affiliated, and I basically sharing my experience and some strategies. I'm happy to go into the workplace and give them a hand.
Right. And you love this work, I could imagine, because you're seeing it transform people's lives,
Yeah, I changed. Absolutely.
And what do you kind of feel the future for the world of disability? Do you think... I think the diagnosis rates of people with autism and stuff is increasing. Do you think that will then mean that there'll be more employers who are compassionate, or...
Well, I call it future-proofing your business, because if you go on the stats now, like I said, it's 700,000 on the scheme, and there's about just under half are under 18. So the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to have an influx of people hitting the workforce who are on the spectrum. But I always say in every disability there's a positive skill there that you can use, and with the spectrum, absolutely. I'm not saying everybody, but I'll give you an example. We placed the guy on the spectrum, and look, they are socially awkward on a pro. That's not politically correct. But
Well,
yeah,
I mean, if you're not using the correct language, I don't know who he is.
Yeah, we put a guy into Hungry Jack's, and he'd get Employee of the Month because there's a structural way of making a burger. The chips have got a bell and a whistle, and you know what I mean. So that actually suited him on the spectrum because it was structured. But if you changed his roster, he'd turn up when he's not supposed to. It was a little thing, but it was a routine. Yeah. So if you just nail those few things on the head, yes, they're going to be socially awkward. Well, you don't put them in customer service role. The other thing is on the spectrum, there's usually got a gift around numbers of information. And if you want somebody with product knowledge and learn the product knowledge, there you go, two people. So you've got to look at each disability's got the strength.
Yeah, I love it.
I could rave on for you.
Oh, please do. But I'm going to have to rein you in, unfortunately. Okay, I'm just going to ask you a couple of sort of left field questions.
Okay.
Dave.
Yes.
In 3 words, I am ...
I am resilient.
Resilient.
And social and solution focused. That's 3 words.
I think you've demonstrated that of what does resilience mean to you?
You got to dust yourself off, get up and keep moving forward. A good soldier never looks behind. And going forward's the only way. I mean, I've had a few things happen, and I suppose, Levi's example, I found out he's deaf. Oh, okay, bit of a shock. Now what do we do?
I'll turn my life around. You'll be doing the big favourite word, the pivot. You'll be doing the pivot and go into the disability world and make a business out of it and just change the course of your life. So talk about silver lining. Yeah. What about the last time you looked in the mirror? The last time I looked in the mirror, I thought what?
Last one, where did the time go?
Really?
Where 20 years ago? Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm 63, or will be 63. It's an interesting time, it's an interesting thing. But, I mean, you've got to be kind to yourself. So I'm kind to myself when I look in the mirror.
You don't think, oh my God, I look like my grandmother or anything like that? Like I do.
You can't change it.
No, you can't change it, that's for sure. Now, I don't know whether you would be a royal lover. Do you have any interest or thoughts on the royals? And do you have a favourite one?
Well, yeah, she was around a long time, Queen Elizabeth as Queen, and whether you like the monarchies or royalty or not, she went through the wars and kept always was the same, I suppose. She was a bit
resilient, perhaps.
Could be.
Yeah.
So Lady Di, I'd say. Yeah.
What did you like about Lady Di?
Oh, she had a crack and she was scared to break the mould. So. Yeah.
It's great, I love it. And what about the song that can't keep you off the dance floor?
Can't keep me off the dance floor?
Yeah, a song that, if there was a song come on at a wedding and you hear it,
you got to get on the dance floor.
You love it, yeah.
Yeah, Pseudo Echo.
So Pseudo Echo's playing, you're dancing away, you're going crazy. Well, I think you seem to have a lot of joy in your life, Dave, anyway. Yeah, that's great. And look, I just have found the whole chat so fascinating. And thankfully you didn't do an Auslan, because that's not very good radio, is it?
No, it's
definitely not. Look, thank you so much for sharing your life and the big pivot, I guess, and how you turned it around. It's been a real joy. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week.